2024. We welcome you as we start our next session, part 4. We had planned originally for 3 parts with Mr. Peter Terry to provide a preview of Gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah. We are having given another week working on this part 4 together. Finally ready to present that today. We're so happy that Mr. Peter Terry was able to have material to bring to speak about this today. Truthfully, we had possibly had even more sessions in plan, but with the Sunday that we had with various speakers, we got it to 4. So we're very happy we made it happen. Systemic study of Guardian selected texts, insights from 1935. Continuation of the preview of the Gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'llah. A synopsis. Mr. Peter Terry, as you've had him in the previous sessions, he is an author, a teacher, a scholar, with 8 published books, 4 chapters published in books, and 50 papers available online. His principal areas of expertise are religious scripture, history, education, philosophy, and theology. For a number of years, he taught online courses for the Wilmette Institute and presented papers for the Irfan Colloquium and the Association for Baha'i Studies. Recently, he has presented on a variety of Baha'i-related subjects, zoomed by the Clearwater Baha'i community. He is a frequent contributor to the Explorations series of Zoom presentations hosted by the Baha'is of Clearwater, Florida. And you can find them at clearwaterbaha'is.org/online-classes. Online-classes. His talks can also be found on their YouTube channel at youtube.com/C for channel/Clearwater Baha'is. With that being said, we welcome all of you who have joined us here on the Zoom. We hope that it will be another productive session. We'll be starting now. And Peter, welcome. We're so happy to have you again for another week. I'm happy that you're able to put this in your calendar and make it happen.
You're welcome. You mean I'm going to be here for a week? Wow.
Yes, this weekly session on this particular day, Sunday, 11 a.m. Yes, sir.
I'm teasing you, and everybody gets it. But it's I really have come to believe that this is the beginning of a university because we're going really deep into a lot of subjects, not just with me, but a number of other speakers have gone into great detail and great depth on a lot of topics. This is really a university. It doesn't have the name of a university, but that's what we're doing here. And that's it's a real privilege to be part of it. I have to tell you, it's a privilege, and it's very exciting because, for many of us, we spent so many years looking for an audience for the kind of things that we were researching. And, in our local communities, very often people got sort of tired of us talking about the same things over and over again, right? And then, occasionally you'd go to an ABS meeting or some big conference, and you'd have like half an hour to give a talk, and that's it, And so this is really thrilling that we're able to not only to go into, have an hour and a half to talk, but to be able to come back over and over and over again to share more. And so I have to say, it's a really terrific experience, and I thank you very much for making this available. And by the way, especially to Mr. Hakim for making all of these things available. It's a real gift to the Baha'i community. So today, because I had the opportunity to do an extra session, I wanted to give you sort of an example of how you can take a particular tablet or a portion of a tablet in Gleanings and then go with it, to not rather than seeing it being an end in itself. see it as being the beginning of an exploration of a particular topic. So I took a few of those topics and focused in on them and did research and learned a bunch of things, as I always do. Whenever I investigate a topic, even if I think I know something about it, that's only the beginning of the search. That's when from there, I go and I explore and I find all kinds of things that I was not expecting. And I have to integrate them into my previous understanding, or sometimes it completely changes my previous understanding. And now I have a new way of looking at things. And that's an ongoing process for me. And I understand it to be a confirmation of what the Guardian said in one of his letters, where he said that the Baha'i faith is scientific in method. It makes a whole lot of sense to me, because if we look into the truth, if our search for truth remains open-ended, we're always looking for something new, and we're never, coming to a dogmatic point where we have nothing to learn, nothing to grow from, then that search continues forever. So without further ado, I want to share my screen with you. Oh, they're going to share the screen. Okay, great. All right. That's fine. So they're going to do it. So I've entitled this one More About Themes and Gleanings. By the way, this series of previews has one purpose. That purpose is to prepare people for an in-depth study of Gleanings, and not just, as you will see today, from a perusal of the quotations that are in Gleanings, but taking each one of those as a starting point for more in-depth and broader search into the topic. Because, as you know, there is no such thing as a comprehensive directory of the Baha'i teachings, where you can go to a particular source and it's going to give you every quotation that's related to a particular topic. Well, maybe the World Center has such a thing, but we certainly do not have that in any published form, and there's a good reason for it. Such a research tool would be so complicated to put together, and it would be so vast in the resources. It would have tens of thousands of documents that it would be coordinating. And it's a project that's definitely on the minds of a number of people for the future, but we don't have it yet. And so that means that there's a lot of digging that goes on whenever you want to find out more about a topic. And the digging is yours to do, or mine to do. You see, we have to do it for ourselves. And we can help each other. And that's certainly the whole point of sessions like this, is to assist each other. So Terry asked, where's the link? The link's in the chat, right? So if you look at the chat, yeah. Oh, and Olga's saying very helpfully that it's resource number 3 on the site. Okay. So just click on that and that will give you the link to the document, which, by the way, has all permissions granted to the users, which means that you can not only download it to your computer, but you can also send it to people if you want. If you find it useful and you want to share it, then you can do that. Okay. Okay. So let's look at these questions. The first one I wanted to share with you is further explorations into the first quotation that I introduced in my previous talk, which is from this 82, number 82, from the Gleanings. And it's about the atom, or rather it's about the history before Adam. So on the first paragraph of that quotation, which you see in front of you, with the question being to Baha'u'llah, how is it that no records are to be found concerning the prophets that have preceded Adam, the father of mankind, or of the kings that lived in the days of those prophets? Know thou that his response is, know thou that the absence of any reference to them is no proof that they did not actually exist. That no records concerning them are now available should be attributed to their extreme remoteness, as well as to the vast changes which the earth hath undergone since their time. Now, one of the things I want to point out, and this is something that I find really kind of surprising when I'm reading Baha'u'llah, is how often he speaks in a very rational, calm, deliberative tone that reminds me of a very good university professor, a really good lecturer. He's not speaking down to us. He's not treating us as if we're stupid. It's clear, it's eloquent, and it's rational. It appeals to our minds. He's saying something that we immediately find credible because it makes sense. So the first quotation I'm sharing with you on this, because this whole concept of there being a manifestations of God before Adam is really rather of a challenge for those of us brought up in the Judeo-Christian tradition, even the Quranic tradition, where we have been taught since we were small children that Adam was not only the first human being, but first prophet of God. For Islam, it's the first prophet of God. And here Baha'u'llah is addressing a question which presumes that there were manifestations of God before Adam. So that means that there were manifestations before the conventional understanding of when Adam existed, which was about 404 BC, or about 6,000 years ago. First quotation I share with you here is from a book called The Dalal et les Sabeh of the Bab. It's called The Seven Proofs. The entire book I have provisionally translated from the French translation of Nicolas. The whole book is not available in a direct translation from Persian, only selections. This particular passage is not found in the selections from the writings of the Bab, which is why I've selected my translation. And the reason why I'm including this one is because he's speaking quite deliberately about a particular passage that relates to this prehistoric existence of Adam. And you can read the whole thing. It's very interesting because it talks about the oneness of the manifestations in a language that is remarkably similar to Baha'u'llah. And I'll read a little bit of that afterwards, but first I want to concentrate on this passage where he says, it is he's speaking of the manifestation, who in this new revolution of the world, 13,000 years old. Okay, so he's saying that the world as we know it, which is not to speak about the physical world, this is talking about the world of revelation as we know it, has existed for 13,000 years. So the concept that we had previously in the Judeo-Christian tradition was that it was about 6,000 years. And now he's introducing this idea of 13,000. And we know from quotations from the Persian Bayan, also by the Bab, that he speaks of Adam, and Adam existing at approximately 11,000 years ago, and then another one existing 12,000 years ago. And as you know, Baha'u'llah speaks in the Kitab-i-Yagan about the manifestations of God appearing on the average of about 1,000 years. And this is a very loose term of average because some manifestations are much closer to each other than 1,000 years, and others are more distant. For example, to give the most clear example of that is you have the Bab and Baha'u'llah, who are separated only by a few years. So, just to point out that that here we're talking about a time cycle of 13,000 years, and this will relate to further comments in the same tablet that's been translated by the Guardian. In this, I wanted to point out that here the Bob is saying in the first evolution, speaking of this first dispensation, he was known under the name Adam, then under that of Noah in the epoch of that prophet. Then he was Abraham in his time, then Jesus, then Muhammad Rasulullah, finally, and of course he's including, the Bob is including himself, because this whole passage is about how he has returned in these different manifestations. And then it says, finally, he says, it is him whom God shall make manifest. This is so interesting. He says, him whom God shall make manifest after him that God shall make manifest in his epoch. So he's talking about the manifestation will come after Baha'u'llah, so as well as Baha'u'llah. 1 second while I instruct my small child to go and yes. Okay, so we're back on topic here. One of the quotations that we find in this passage that's in red is the prophets, that's me. Now, why have I highlighted that one? I've highlighted that one because Baha'u'llah uses exactly the same hadith, the same Islamic tradition in twice in Kitab Yagan. And indeed, there are other quotations here that are also found in the Yagan. The connection between the 7 proofs of the Bab and the Kitab Yagan of Baha'u'llah are actually very close. And someday scholars will study them and look at those parallels and see how the Bab was preparing for Baha'u'llah, and how even Baha'u'llah was responding to the presumed familiarity of the uncle of the Bab with the 7 proofs when he reiterates many of the same points in that book. So let's advance this a little bit more here so we can see this. All right. Then I wanted to cite a passage that's from this footnote here is explaining where I am all the prophets is found in the Kitab Yagan and the exact quotations there. So that's for your further study. Then if you keep going. All right. Then here's a passage, a remarkable passage from Baha'u'llah. If I think you have to scroll to the bottom for me to be able to see where it's actually found. Oh, it's not telling me. Why do you have to scroll up then? Let me see. Because it's someplace I want you to know where to find this quotation. Yeah, keep going, keep going. Oh yeah, I see. It's in Gleanings. It's Gleanings. It's chapter 39. Okay, chapter 39, or reading 39 from the Gleanings. Okay. And so this passage is describing a teaching of Baha'u'llah, which we found in the Kitab Yagan, where he talks about how the manifestations of God are all one. They all have a station of oneness, and they have a station of uniqueness, of distinction. But this station of oneness is the more important station, and it's the one that Bob emphasized in this quotation from the 7 proofs, and that Baha'u'llah does in this passage. I wanted to read a little bit of this passage because it is so beautifully worded and speaks especially about the oppression and the sufferings of the manifestations, and and not only about their authority or their divine inspiration. At one time thou didst deliver me into the hands of Nimrod, at another thou hast allowed Pharaoh's rod to persecute me. Now, Nimrod is going to be a reference to Abraham. At another thou hast allowed Pharaoh's rod to persecute me. That's speaking of Moses. Thou alone canst estimate through thine all-encompassing knowledge and the operation of thy will the incalculable afflictions I have suffered at their hands. Again, thou didst cast me into prison, into the prison cell of the ungodly. That's a reference to Joseph, who was also prophet of God, according to the Quran and also the Baha'i writings. For no reason except that I was moved to whisper into the ears of the well-favored denizens of thy kingdom an intimation of the vision with which thou hadst, through thy knowledge, inspired me and revealed to me its meaning through the potency of thy might. In other words, he's talking about the fact that Joseph could interpret dreams and that this was his gift from God. And of course, he was persecuted because he had this extraordinary gift. And against thou didst decree that I be beheaded by the sword of the infidel. And who is that speaking of? That's speaking of John the Baptist. You remember the story in the Gospels about how the daughter of the king was motivated by her mother, who was humiliated by the fact that John the Baptist did not approve of her basically adulterous marriage to her husband, this being a second marriage. And John the Baptist was outspokenly critical of her for that, and for both members of the couple. And the daughter was able to persuade her father-in-law, excuse me, her stepfather, to kill John the Baptist, to behead him, to bring his head on a platter, and that's what this refers to. And I think one of the I'll bring this point up in a minute. I just want to finish this particular thing, and then he says, again, I was crucified for having unveiled to men's eyes the hidden gems of thy glorious unity, for having revealed to them the wondrous signs of thy sovereign and everlasting power. That is speaking of Jesus, of course. Howbeit are the humiliations heaped upon me in a subsequent age in the plain of Karbala, speaking of the Imam Hussein. This is the second son of Ali, Ali being the cousin of Muhammad, who was appointed by him to be his successor, but then he was passed over and then killed. And then his sons were killed too, and the great sufferings of that family. But it refers specifically to Hussein, because Hussein was taken up by the tradition, the Islamic tradition in Iran, as having a particularly high standing amongst all of the Muslims. And so consequently, he's mentioning that name so that it's understood that this one, in fact, is the same as me. And you can read the rest of it. I will skip down just to the end of the highlighted section. In a later age, I was suspended, and my breast was made a target to the darts of the malicious cruelty of my foes. My limbs were riddled with bullets, and my body was torn asunder. That's a reference to the Bab. Okay, so Baha'u'llah is associating himself. He's saying, I am these people. This is the unity of the manifestations. And it encompasses, as you see, not just manifestations, lesser prophets too, because John the Baptist was not a manifestation in the universal sense. He was a lesser prophet. And also the Imams, because all of them are bringing the spiritual message to us. And even though they are of different stations from each other, they're not identical. In the realm of distinction, they are different. But in the realm of unity, they are the same. And how is this related? This is related because it goes to this theme of here we're talking about the history of manifestations. And Baha'u'llah is always trying to remind us that the manifestations are one manifestation in a particular way of looking at the reality of the manifestation. This is a spiritual messenger who comes back over and over again to us. And then we're going to go to the next passage, which is talking about the forms and modes of writing that are now current amongst men, not being known in the time of Adam. And this is there are two things I want to point out. One is that as Baha'u'llah is talking about prehistory here, he's talking about what we basically are. We turn to anthropologists and archaeologists to clarify what happened in prehistory. Basically, anthropology and archaeology hardly existed at all at the time this was written. They were in their very infancy as sciences. And Baha'u'llah is basically giving us a preview of the kind of field that we're going to go into in the future, where we're going to be exploring prehistory, even as we explore the knowledge of the history that's written down, that we have lots of artifacts to that are easily available that inform us about what has happened, what people have done, what they've said, and so forth. And a very interesting point here is he says, for a proper exposition of this, an elaborate explanation would be required. Right? So first of all, I would point out, he doesn't say, I don't know anything about this, or, it's above your pay grade. You don't have any right to know this stuff. He doesn't say either of those things. He says it would take a really long time for me to explain all of this stuff. So clearly, there's much more he knows about it. There's much more that he could talk about. So why doesn't he talk about it? I think it's important for us to be aware that when somebody writes a letter or a tablet to somebody, he's very aware of the fact that that person has limited cognitive ability to understand what is being said, and he has limited time. He's like, what I find particularly is a good example in our time is when you send an email to somebody, general, and even more so if you send a chat message, a text message. If you do more than about one line, the person is not likely to read it. And for sure, if they respond, they will only respond to the first line or so of your message. And you might have written, as I do, very long emails or very long chat messages, and I keep finding that people don't actually read them. They just read the very beginning. So Baha'u'llah has this extraordinary capacity to know the capacity of his reader, and he's going to say he's going to say what that person is capable of understanding at that time and for that purpose. But it indicates that if this is known, if an elaborate explanation could be provided, it means that's there. It means that information is somewhere. And this is, I think, a great challenge for us human beings, is to never think that something is completely inaccessible. We just have to keep digging. And literally, this means digging. If anybody here follows archaeology, you know that new discoveries are being found all the time. And one of the things that's very fascinating about the archaeology in the Holy Land is they keep making discoveries that are confirming the biblical record of history, which is, because there's been a lot of doubt about the things written in the Bible and whether they can be relied upon. Well, they keep finding these corroborations in physical evidence that is discovered under the ground, sometimes quite deep down, when they're trying to, create a cistern or build a building, and they need to find a secure foundation for whatever reasons. So then the next thing I wanted to point out to you is here you have this passage about consider the differences of languages that have arisen since the days of Adam. Diverse and widely known languages now spoken by the peoples of the earth were originally unknown, as were the varied rules and customs now prevailing amongst them. The people of those times spoke a language different from those now known. Diversities of language arose in a later age in the land known as Babel. It was given the name Babel because the term signifieth the place where the confusion of tongues arose. Now, a point made here. Muslims generally get their testimony of what is important from reading the Quran and reading the Hadith. This is their source of truth. They believe fervently that this is the final scripture from God. And so anything that's of real importance is there. And they do not read the Bible. The Bible was not used as a source even by scholars in Baha'u'llah's time. What we find with Baha'u'llah is very often in the Gems of Divine Mysteries, which he wrote before the Kitab-i-Iqan, in the Kitab-i-Iqan, and in this tablet as well, he is making references to the Bible as a source of information, of accurate information about the past. This is something for us to take note of, because clearly Baha'u'llah is expanding the consciousness of the person he's writing to. We know that he wrote this tablet to Abdul Razak, and we know Abdul Razak was of Muslim background because that is a Muslim name. It's not a Jewish or a Christian name. So his background would have been very much in the Quran and in the Hadith and not in the Bible. And he's educating. He's educating about the Bible is actually a very important source for prehistory. If you want to understand what's going on in the past, you need to study the Bible. So now we're going to go to the next passage where she's talking about the sequence of languages. And it says, subsequently, Syriac became prominent among the existing languages. The sacred scriptures, the former times, were revealed in that tongue. Later, Abraham, the friend of God, appeared and shed upon the world the light of divine revelation. The language he spoke while he crossed the Jordan became known as Hebrew, Ibrani, which meaneth the language of the crossing. The books of God and the sacred scriptures were then revealed in that tongue, and not until after a considerable lapse time did Arabic become the language of revelation. Again, biblical reference. Even though Abraham is obviously spoken of in the Quran, there's nothing about him crossing the Jordan and taking on this new name. That's in the Hebrew text. As far as Syriac is another name for Aramaic. It's the language, the generic language that was spoken most in Mesopotamia, in that area of the world, Iraq, Syria. And according to this, that language was the predominant language, not only for the area, but also for Revelation prior to Abraham. And Abraham, when he crossed over crossed over the Jordan River, where does he cross over to? He crosses over to the Holy Land. He crosses over to the land that was promised to him and for his descendants. Again, this is a biblical reference. There's no reference to this in the Quran. And this promise that this particular land was going to go to him and his descendants also implies here that when he went to live in that place, he adopted a new language. And that language, and this is corroborated by the historical sources. Hebrew language is greatly influenced by Phoenician, and Phoenician is the language that was spoken a great deal in the Holy Land at that time. And Hebrew while it has all kinds of roots and connections to Aramaic as well, Aramaic and Syriac, it has been influenced by Phoenician. So, and then Arabic, here it's saying Arabic became the language of revelation afterwards. So as we know, and as we know from many different sources, Syriac or Aramaic was a prehistorical language that was used by the prophets of God, probably by Enoch, probably by other manifestations. And then with Abraham, you have Hebrew, and the manifestations, the prophets that happen at, subsequent to him, including Moses, were speaking Hebrew and writing in Hebrew. And then after them, and by the way, here's an interesting point. What did Jesus speak? There's a huge difference of opinion between scholars on this question about what language did Jesus speak and what language was used originally in the Gospels. And there are some scholars who have maintained, although they are not the majority of the scholars, have maintained that Jesus must have spoken Hebrew, because if he was not speaking Hebrew, he was not going to be understood of by the common Jewish people, because the common Jewish people were not speaking either Greek, which was the language of the merchants and the intellectuals, nor were they speaking Roman or Latin, because Latin was the language of the governing force that had been imposed by the Roman Empire. So their contention is that Jesus spoke Hebrew, and in fact, there's a story that is well attested in the scholarly literature, that Jerome, who translated the entire Bible into Latin, which became the principal language whereby it was studied by Christians for over 1,000 years, that Jerome insisted that the first gospel was the Gospel of Matthew, and the Gospel of Matthew was originally written in Hebrew. So, as you can imagine, each one of these threads gives you an opportunity to just go off and explore all kinds of interesting questions and to try to find answers. So there's no end to this, really. This one paragraph, it could be the source of many books right there. And then, of course, it talks about Arabic. Well, Arabic becomes the language of revelation with Muhammad. But Arabic was the language of revelation before Muhammad. It's an interesting point, is because in the Quran, it talks about two manifestations of God who are not mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures. And those manifestations of God are said to have come from Arabia. Well, presumably they spoke Arabic and they revealed their scriptures also in Arabic, even though we don't have any record of those scriptures apart from references to them in the Quran. So you have Arabic being the language of revelation, which it continues through Baha'u'llah. As you know, many of the writings of Baha'u'llah are written in Arabic. So we're gonna advance here. Okay. And I think that I think I've probably made most of the important points that I wanted to make about this passage. So I'm rather than just continue forever, I want to say that there's that towards the end of it, there's a reference to the book of Yuk, and this is a very interesting question, which scholars have only begun to look into. But it looks like when Baha'u'llah is referring to the different chronologies that exist for prehistory and notes that they are quite different in their results, that he seems to have made a reference to a book that was written originally in Sanskrit. Because actually Yuk is probably a transliteration of Yug, and Yuga is the name for a certain interval of time in Hindu tradition. So, but there are also not just Indian traditions. There are all these other traditions, which I note here. I share with you what I was able to find about the prehistoric accounts of the deluge, of the flood that exist in the area of Mesopotamia, and which were known to the Jews and the Arabs, and have found their way into many books, and of course are described in the Bible as the flood of Noah. And this being a turning point, certainly a turning point for human civilization, but also a sort of a marking point between a kind of prehistory and the historical development. And their documents have since been found, actually around the same time as Baha'u'llah would have been writing this tablet, and were not well known at that time, but have become much more well known since, and that speak about this prehistory. So I wanted to cut to the chase to the end here, and look at the very last statement that Baha'u'llah makes, because it's a very, very important and enigmatic statement. So if you just go a little bit more here, and by the way, as you can see, I'm not following what I've written very strictly. You can read the whole paper, and hopefully there'll be some interesting material in it. And although I do not have any more sessions scheduled for this topic at this point, what is planned for the future is a page by page or selection by selection study of the Gleanings, which will happen by next May, if not earlier. It's possible earlier, but definitely by next May. And so let's advance this a little bit more. Okay, let's advance until we find Baha'u'llah. Mine is all, I've got this italic. There you go. Please, God, thou wilt turn thine eyes towards the most great revelation. Watch out, you cut off my head, cut off my words. So scroll down a little bit so I can see the top of the page. No, the other way. The other way, I should say up. Scroll up. Yes, just a little bit. Okay, yes. Please, God, thou wilt turn thine eyes towards the most great revelation and entirely disregard these conflicting tales and traditions. I think it's very important for us to understand that Baha'u'llah is not stating that we shouldn't study history. He's not stating that we should, don't pay any attention to all this stuff that's happened in the past. It's not important. He's not saying that. Because if he were saying that, then his very careful attention to history and a number of other tablets wouldn't make any sense at all. No, he actually pays a great deal of attention to history and giving us an accurate depiction of history, which is so often corrupted and misunderstood by mere human beings because we don't get all the facts. That's something the manifestation does get. The manifestation gets the big picture. And this is why reliance upon him is so important. We only see a tiny bit of reality, and that tiny bit of reality leads us to come to conclusions which are very often erroneous. And so if we want to get it right, we need to turn to him. So where do I get that? How do I speak with such confidence about this interpretation of those words? Very simple. When he's talking about turn thine eyes towards the most great revelation, he's talking about something very specific. He's talking about the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Turn your eyes to what the manifestation is revealing to you at this time, and do not put your dependence on all the things that are said about a particular topic. There has to be a standard of truth, and that standard of truth in this day and age is Baha'u'llah. And here are two quotations about this very truth that are from tablets in response to questions from a Zoroastrian man named Manik Chi Sahib. And they're written in pure Persian, and they were published in a collection of essays called The Tabernacle of Unity. By the way, these are all available online at the Baha'i Reference Library, which now can be accessed through Baha'i.org. So the first passage, he says, and most of you have heard this passage before, but it's very often cited out of context. And I thought it's really important for you to see it in the original context. The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. And then let's go on to the next passage, which is reiterating this, but with some more important additions. He saith, be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. For in this day, he who is the Lord of revelation hath appeared, and he who spoke on Sinai is calling aloud. Whatsoever he may ordain is the surest foundation for the mansions reared in the cities of human knowledge and wisdom. Whoso holdeth fast unto it, will be reckoned in the eyes of the Almighty among them who are endued with insight. These sublime words have streamed forth from the pen of the Most High. He saith, exalted be his glory. This is the day of vision, for the countenance of God is shining resplendent above the horizon of manifestation. This is the day of hearing, for the call of God hath been, scroll, raised. It behooveth everyone in this day to be uphold and proclaim that which hath been revealed by him who is the author of all scripture, the dayspring of revelation, the fount of knowledge and the source of divine wisdom. It is thus clear and evident that the reply to this question, his question being Manakshi Sahib's question, hath been revealed in the kingdom of utterance by him who is the exponent of the knowledge of the all-merciful. Happy are they that understand. We need to understand he's speaking authority. He's saying, if you want the truth, the standard of truth is right here. Don't go pull out your musty old books and quote stuff to me, because they are misleading in many of their details. If you want to know something, speak to someone who knows something, and that's me. And I added a quotation from another tablet that we looked at last week that is coming to the same conclusion, where he says, we beseech God to strengthen thee with his power and enable thee to recognize him who is the source of all knowledge, that thou mayest detach thyself from all human learning. For what would it profit any man to strive after learning when he hath already found and recognized him who is the object of all knowledge? Cleave to the root of knowledge, and to him who is the fountain thereof, that thou mayest find thyself independent of all who claim to be well versed in human learning, and whose claim no clear proof nor the testimony of any enlightening book can support. And there are quotations also in the Kitabi where he makes very similar statements, again, about the standard. You have the standard of truth, the standard of knowledge right in front of you. Take advantage of this. Both the Bab and Baha'u'llah wrote on different occasions that the day of God, one way to look at the day of God is the day in which the manifestation of God is alive on the planet. He's there. And that day of God, our access to the completeness of truth about reality is unparalleled to any other time, because we've got the source right there. So what we need to do is turn to that source And that source never goes away because the manifestations wrote, at least the most recent ones wrote for themselves in their own handwriting. And therefore, in the case of Baha'u'llah, we have something like 20,000 tablets that have been verified, have been authenticated, and that gradually will be translated and made available to us. The riches of this are really, they're mind-boggling when we consider that the Quran is one book. Baha'u'llah wrote hundreds of books, thousands of books. Let's go on to another theme. As perhaps you're seeing here, this one passage from the Gleanings, when you open it up and you consider the themes that are inside of it, you see more and more and more, and we've just touched the surface here. So let's move on. This is still about history. We're going to move on to a different topic. But it's a different topic, but it's also connected to history. He's not talking about history here. He's talking about how do things come into existence, all right? You remember from last week, the quotation that now is cut off. So just go back a little bit, go back, and it will appear. He's talking about the death of Jesus. It says what happened when he died. And all that when the Son of Man yielded up his breath to God, the whole creation wept with a great weeping. By sacrificing himself, however, a fresh capacity was infused into all created things. By the way, Christians understand this. And so we have to be aware when we talk to Christians that we understand it, right? Because if we don't, then they're going to know that we don't have anything to teach them. Its evidences as witnessed by all the peoples of the earth and now manifest before thee. And then here's the quote that is really that I wanted to highlight. The deepest wisdom which the sages have uttered, the profoundest learning which any mind hath unfolded, the arts which the ablest hands have produced, the influence exerted by the most potent of rulers are but manifestations of the quickening power released by his transcendent, his all-pervasive and resplendent spirit. Now that's powerful in itself, because it's telling us that the hidden source of everything that has come into existence has been influenced by the manifestation of God. And here we thought we did it all ourselves. We built the beautiful buildings, we wrote the wonderful books, we composed the music, we made the instruments, we did all these great things. Aren't we fabulous? Okay. Oh, well, except that maybe that's not really true, because the source of all of that comes from the manifestation of God. It comes from a spiritual source. But it doesn't stop there. Because in this other statement we find, and this was quoted last week as well, it said the prophets and messengers of God have been sent down with the sole purpose of guiding mankind to the straight path of truth. The purpose underlying their revelation hath been to educate all men, that they may at the hour of death ascend in the utmost purity and sanctity with absolute detachment to the throne of the Most High. And here's the punchline. The light which these souls radiate is responsible for the progress of the world and the advancement of its peoples. They are like unto leaven which leaveneth the world of being and constitute the animating force through which the arts and wonders of the world are made manifest. So the spiritual impulse that has brought all of these phenomena into existence is from the manifestation of God and from his followers, the souls of his followers in the next world. So this is definitely related to this, right? But it's related to acknowledging where do the actual sources come from. The actual sources that we have identified are always in the great men, or the great women, the great people. Look at what we've done. Aren't we fantastic? And here Baha'u'llah is retraining our vision to look at what's the real source being the manifestations of God in their believers.
Can I have a hug?
Now, I wanted to share a passage from the Hikmat, the Tablet of Wisdom, that speaks to the same question. Where do all the wonderful cultural developments that we see in the world, where they come from? In one of his statements, Baha'u'llah says, all things come from the power of reflection. What is the power of reflection? It's that capacity of the human mind to pick up something that is there, right? But it's not that we created it, we receive it. And indeed, Baha'u'llah confirms that in this passage. For every land, we have prescribed a portion. For every occasion, an allotted share. For every pronouncement, an appointed time. And for every situation, an apt remark. Consider Greece. We made it a seat of wisdom for a prolonged period. However, when the appointed hour struck, its throne was subverted, its tongue ceased to speak, its light grew dim, and its banner was hauled down. Thus do we bestow and withdraw. And then you skip to the next paragraph. In every land, we have set up a luminary of knowledge, and when the time foreordained it is at hand, it will shine resplendent above its horizon, as decreed by God, the all-knowing, the all-wise. Again, what is the source? What is the source of all this extraordinary development that we see in the world? It's coming from the will of God. It is God who directs this, not us. And so when the manifestation says that all things come from God, he means it. This is not speaking in some sort of metaphorical, mystical sense that actually is incomprehensible to us. This is a very comprehensible sense. We can actually understand that when we go and you see the wonders of the world around us, not just the ones that are natural, but the ones that we have supposedly created ourselves, that the impulse behind that creation has come from God. All things come from God. This is a very powerful consciousness that once we have this consciousness, it changes everything for us. It means that everything is in harmony with what God's will is. Rather than us thinking that we live in sort of this separate universe where we do our thing. This is the separation of religion from everything else in life that has been happening progressively since the Enlightenment actually started, probably in the Renaissance. This separation has resulted in us really believing that we live in two worlds, a mystical, magical world that we don't really understand, and that's having to do with God and religion and so forth. And then we have this real concrete world that we definitely relate to that. And that's the world that we've created in the midst of nature. And Paula just shatters that. He says, no, it's one world. It's one world, and it's all inspired by God. It all comes with it. It all is issued forth by the powers of his revelation. Let's scroll. How much time do we have?
Daddy,
You need to close the
we're
door.
leaving soon, so are you coming?
You need to close the door.
Okay, but are you coming with us?
Yes. So this tendency that we have to look at things as if they are created by us in the world and detached and have no spiritual impulse or origin. Baha'u'llah refers to this in the Kitabi, the Loy Hikmat. Again, the Tablet of Wisdom. He says, when the eyes of the people of the East, meaning Iran in this case, were captivated by the arts and wonders of the West, they roved distraught in the wilderness of material causes, oblivious of the one who is the causer of causes and the sustainer thereof. In a later passage, you can scroll down so we can get to that one. He says something that we would find quite extraordinary. Now, we tend to believe that we're constantly in a state of progress, and that what we know today is better than what people knew previously, because it's more comprehensive, it's more accurate, it's more based on facts and data and so forth. Allah kind of looks at things in a very different way here. He says, were anyone to observe with a discriminating eye, he would readily comprehend that most of the knowledge of contemporary men of learning, hath been acquired from the sages of the past. For it is they who have laid the foundation of philosophy, reared its structure, and reinforced its pillars. Thus doth thy Lord, the Ancient of Days, inform thee. He doesn't stop there. Shortly thereafter, he says, the sages aforetime acquired their knowledge from the prophets. Oh my! Yes. So not only were they inspired from the next world by the manifestations of God and their followers, but they were actually imparted from the prophets in this world. Inasmuch as the latter were the exponents of divine philosophy and the revealers of heavenly mysteries, men quaffed the crystal living waters of their utterance, while others satisfied themselves with the dregs. Everyone receiveth a portion according to his measure. Again, he reiterates that point. The essence and fundamentals of philosophy have emanated from the prophets. That the people differ concerning the inner meanings and mysteries thereof is to be attributed to the divergence of their views and minds. In other words, if we have confusion about things, and some of us have more knowledge and less knowledge, and we get all confounded about what's real and what's unreal, is us. It's not, you can't blame it on the prophets. Prophets have revealed all things to us, and our capacity is what limits us. And that capacity is, of course, not innate. To a degree, it's innate. I don't want to completely reject that idea, but it's very large degree affected by education. The degree to which we open our minds and our hearts to learning new things, which comes back to the fact that each one of these passages from Gleanings is a window into a world of new learning. We just have to go through that window, not just look at it, not just look at the window and, oh, isn't that nice and quaint, but actually open the window and go in and explore what the further meanings are that we can encounter for ourselves. I have an instinct that, an intuition that I'm running out of time. And so I just want to ask Jeremiah, if you will tell me how much time is left.
So it's 12:05 right now. The hard stop is in 25 minutes. If we have enough questions from the audience and from everyone in Zoom, then we could probably get started with that in about 5 minutes. So if you want to wrap up kind of the
Okay. So what I want to point out, since all of you have access to the link for this document, you will find that the document is much longer than this. You will find that I only covered probably a relatively small percentage of it. Let me see how many pages. What page is this on? Can you scroll up or down so I can see what page it's on? Yeah, we're on page 9. There are 15 pages. Yes. So there's a lot more to go. And again, this is a lot more that's basically discussing 3 or 4 topics amongst the many topics that were cited earlier, which were only a small selection of the passages included in the Gleanings. So what you will see if you study this in whole document is you will see that each one of the quotations that were so beautifully translated by the Guardian is a window into a world of realities that we didn't know much about. In some cases, we didn't know anything before we encountered the quotation. But the quotation is a window into other windows. It is, we are invited to go as far as we will take it. And luckily for us, this is our gift, is that we have the opportunity to explore this for ourselves. And we have these extraordinary tools, which again are coming through the inspiration of the manifestations and their followers. We got all the tools we need to explore these for ourselves, and we don't have to rely on anyone. And sometimes people say that, but what they really mean is you don't have to rely on anyone but me. But that's not true, because whatever I have learned about how to find these, I've learned for myself, and I've learned by doing it, and I've learned by failing. Failing's wonderful. When you fail, then you know, well, that didn't work. So you move on to something that does. You just keep going until you find that you find ways in which you increase your knowledge. And the increase of knowledge is not, sometimes I think people may suspect that the more you know, that the more you get weighed down by your knowledge, and the more your mind becomes sort of cluttered with all this stuff, as if your mind was sort of a bank, and although I don't think many of us, have any problem with putting lots of things in the bank, but maybe we are thinking of the bank in some other sense, that, the money's taking up too much space in there. But that's not really the case at all. The capacity of the soul to grasp reality is infinite. The potential that we have is so it will only be developed to a very limited degree compared to the way our children and our children's children and the children 1,000 years from now will be aware of these realities. We keep looking, we keep finding, because this is what God does for us. He's created this capacity, which is an endless capacity. So, yes, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to leave this document with you to explore for more fully, and invite your questions and comments, and recall for you that my promise is this is just a preview. There's been 4 previews here of a course, and the course will be to go through the entire collection of Gleanings and to give full attention to each selection and show what are the connections that selection has for other writings of Baha'u'llah, for writings of Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi. But that's also an artificial distinction, because there's the history of the world, there are the sciences of the world, there are the arts of the world. There's infinite space for us to grow in our awareness of what these passages are introducing to us. Okay, so who has their, if you will take down the document, we can look at each other face to face, and you can indicate that you want to speak to Jeremiah by showing your hand, and he will select you. Now, I know that the most difficult one to ask a question is the first one. Everybody is waiting for the first person to say something, and then they'll jump in, right? Okay, so somebody be courageous and jump in first.
I guess
So
that's
the first
Eileen.
question is,
Oh,
you take
yes, go
from
ahead.
Gleanings, you take from Gleanings, and I'm wondering, do we have all the documents that go with those selections that Shoghi Effendi chose from Gleanings to be able to read the rest of the story, so to speak? Or do we have to wait for those to be translated into English and matched up with the quotations that Shoghi Effendi chose for Gleanings?
Okay, so there's a two-part answer to your question. The actual original writings in Persian and Arabic have all been identified. They have been collected into a volume. That volume is published, available online. And indeed, in the previous resources that I shared with you, I included a link to that document, but I included that document so that for those people who read the Persian and Arabic, if they want to actually look at the original texts, they're all collected. Okay, they're all available. So that's number one. Number two, when will they all be translated, the entire tablets? Well, let me give you an answer. There are many quotations from the Kitab-i-Igan that the Guardian included in Gleanings. Well, he translated the entire Kitab-i-Igan. Okay, so the Igan is totally available, cover to cover, no problem. Okay, there are quotations from the Kitab-i-Aqdas. The Kitab-i-Aqdas, the whole book has been translated with fabulous notes and all kinds of aids that were prepared by the research department. Okay, there are tablets included here that have not yet been translated in full by the World Center, or which may have already been translated, but have not been put on the schedule yet for publication. One thing we should always remember is that when we wish that we had access to everything, we don't know, we have no concept of what that would do to our lives. Honestly, my friends, imagine if you suddenly tomorrow had access to the 30,000 tablets of Abdul Baha, the 20,000 tablets of Baha'u'llah, and they, probably also 30,000 letters written by and on behalf of the Guardian. Literally, who has the brain to handle that? And we don't even have the computer capacity to crunch that stuff and make sense of it. It's going to come out gradually. And as it comes out, every single time it comes out, we're going to have that wonderful feeling of joy, of discovery, because we're going to learn new things. But I think that one of the things that we have to remember is that the Guardian translated many books and many passages from books almost a century ago. And we haven't mastered those yet. So, I remember I had this friend from the Cameroon, and I was talking to him about all the Baha'i books that were being published and new books, and I was so excited about it. He says, "Yes, Peter, but how many people do you know who have read the hidden words?" Ooh, that was quite a pungent moment for me, because honestly, I hadn't read the hidden words recently and really carefully. So we have to realize that we have these resources, but you have to go back to them. You have to go back to them and re-explore them, because what you were capable of understanding when you were 25 is different when you're 35 and 45 and 55. If you keep with an open mind searching, and if you are in a process of spiritual development. You will understand more as you get older. There's no doubt about
the
it.
reason I even asked the questions the way I did is, can we depend any on AI to put in, say, a Persian or an Arabic passage and have it translate into English in the style of Shoghi Effendi? Say,
No,
can we use AI
no.
to do that?
You can't rely on it. And I'll tell you why. It's because you would have to have the language skills of Adib Masumian or Shoghi Effendi to be able to verify that the AI translation is accurate. But you don't have those skills. So you're just trusting that AI has those skills. And we have to understand, when you create a machine, the machine is only as good as the input you put into the machine. And the input in this machine is not capable of divine discernment. And we will be reading the Guardian's translations for the rest of this dispensation, maybe even into the next dispensation, because they're the Guardian's translations. Right. And there was nobody around who had his insights. And this is one of the reasons why the World Center is so careful. They use this brilliant program called CTC that enables them to see how Shoghi Effendi translated every word from Persian and Arabic, every word in different contexts. And this is why they use it all the time.
I think I got it started. I'm going to let others ask questions. Thank you
Okay, all right.
so much.
Eileen, you want to speak?
Unmute. Two very quick things. First, I suspect that Baha'u'llah revealed a lot, i.e., wrote it down, but we're not ready yet for a lot of what he may have said or written, primarily written. And that a lot of those tablets probably won't be translated on request of the House of Justice until we're ready for them. That's just my guess, but it stands to reason that since the House of Justice is guided by Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah is very much in charge of the process of the translations of his words and the release of his words. That's just a thought. And the other one thought was, I was very glad to hear you mention manifestations of God as far back as 13,000 BC, because I'm really tired of the suggestions, for instance, that Adam was responsible for bringing the Neolithic Revolution and la 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 la. The Neolithic Revolution started about 5,000 years, 3,000 years, 9,000 something before, no, 5,000. 9 take away 4 is 5, right? 5,000 years before Adam. And it only stands to reason that since the Neolithic Revolution, that is agriculture, is so much a part of our lives now and has been for thousands of years, that it would have been a manifestation of God for within this time frame, who ushered and what's the word, to urge on a lot of things that we take for granted. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So first of all, I wanted to remind everybody here that even though we haven't done a particularly good job of this in our century, in the 20th century and beginning of 21st century, Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi encouraged Baha'is to learn Arabic and Persian. Now, if we someday, hopefully, we'll get around to actually teaching our kids these languages, and we will read the scriptures in the original language. When we read the scriptures in the original languages, we will find that there's a great deal more that's available published in these languages than is available in English translation, a great deal more. And so it's not as if the House of Justice has said, oh no, you're not ready for a whole bunch of stuff, so we won't publish them. No, they publish them. They've been available. It's just we don't read Arabic and Persian. Even the Persians don't read Arabic and Persian. And this is one of the reasons why you have Persians who've been in this country for many years and who did not have a classical education in Arabic and Persian when they were in Iran, will tell you, I get more out of reading The Guardian than I could ever get out of reading the original. I just don't get it. I don't understand the original language well enough. So I think that's one of the things for us to understand, is that there's much more out there that simply hasn't come into English, and who knows when it will, because how many people have the expertise? Translation is a tough job, and nowadays, we're absolutely enamored with AI, and we think AI is going to change everything, and we can just translate everything using AI. But then the whole question again becomes, who's going to verify that the AI translation actually is accurate? And I have seen, I'm on this list that's called research.edu. No, it's called academic.edu. And this research space where there are literally millions of people sharing papers and so forth on these, most of whom are academics. One of the things that I've encountered is where academics are describing the AI translations of the summaries of their dissertations, and they're furious. They're absolutely livid because they say the AI translation has nothing to do with what I wrote. It got all mixed up, and people are relying on that information as if it's accurate. And so we got to really watch it with this whole thing. And this is actually the originators of AI. Some of them, including Elon Musk, warned us when it first came out, when first GPT came out, said, watch out, guys. You think that this is going to be the end all and be all, and it's not. There are going to be a lot of problems, and we're going to have to face those. So that's one thing I want to say, is that reading the writings in the original languages will eventually become much more common in the Baha'i community, and it will inform us about many, many things about which we just don't know at this point. And the second thing is that I think that you're pointing out is that there are correlations between what archaeologists have found and what historians have found, in the past 100 or 150 years, with what Baha'u'llah is saying and what the Bab was saying, they open up all kinds of channels for research, all kinds of channels for new knowledge. And those channels are not fixed. When you're going to teach history in a classroom, you're using a book, and it's published in a certain date, and it represents the knowledge of historians that the authors are familiar with up to that point. But if you get an old history book from the 1950s and compare it to a history book that was written last year, there's all kinds of stuff in the new one that's not in the old one. And the perspective very often of the writer is very different from it was back in the 50s. And we should expect that's just going to continue, And so these fields of knowledge are just they're constantly being pushed, the boundaries pushed. And I think for most people, they have this experience of expanding knowledge only in the secular world. They only have it based upon academic sources, scientific sources, sources that come from human authorities. What's exciting for Baha'is is we have it not just in that world, but we also have it in Baha'u'llah. We have it in Baha'u'llah, and we have it corroborated by Abdul Baha and Chogi Effendi. And so we've got an opportunity to expand our knowledge that is, it's so much greater than the average person. And this is what we want to tell them is not sort of the old talking line of the old religious folk, which is don't trust anything but the Bible. We want to say, no, that's not the message of Baha'u'llah at all. The message is open your mind to every source of truth there is, because you never know where you're going to find it. And if you close your mind, then you definitely won't find it. That's why Abdul Baha was so insistent. We can't have dogmas. Dogmas can't exist in the Baha'i faith, because that means that we stopped learning. We've decided what something means, and we're not going to look at any other way of looking at it.
I think now's a pretty good time
Where's
to
the hand?
wrap up.
Oh, wrap up. Okay.
Yep. So basically, this is the last session. So if you guys missed the 3 previous, please go back and check that out. And as soon as we get a date on the course that you're going to be initiating, Peter, next year, let us know and we'll be sure to put it up.
Yeah, I will. And I just want to point out to you that, if we began to cover a few topics found in Gleanings, and it took us 4 sessions of an hour and a half in length, the study of Gleanings is going to take a while. Okay, it's going to take a while, but I can promise you this: when you will have read the entire Gleanings and studied it thoroughly, your whole approach to Baha'i scripture will change, because you will have practiced opening the windows. That's what it is, over and over again. So I'm so glad to see you here today, and thank you for coming back over and over, and hope to see you again sometime soon.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you to the audience, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.